Right, thanks, Anna. Good day, everyone, and welcome to Brazil's seminar. For those of you who are following us on YouTube and online all over the world, we're speaking directly from New York, Columbia University. We have a very distinguished guest joining us tonight. Before introducing him, I'm just going to say a few words about the Brazil seminar. It's a seminar that is part of a graduate course at the School of International Public Affairs. So for those of you who are following us online, you're joining an actual class today. The topic is OECD accession, and it's a big topic these days in Brazil, not only because it's an opportunity for Brazil to join what's sometimes it's called a rich club membership, but mostly it's an opportunity for Brazil to rethink public policies and to align some of those policies with global best practices. In the past, when we know from experience that by designing policies, sometimes you need big goals and one unified goal in order for constituencies to be motivated and to know exactly where they should be directing their efforts. And we saw that in the 90s when Brazil, and the 2000s when Brazil was looking for to get investment grade and facilitate access to investment opportunities. It's a very similar context that we are discussing right now as Brazil has prioritized accession to OECD in the context that we are experiencing right now. And it's a big privilege for us to have someone who has been at the forefront of public policy in Brazil as someone who used to be a Deputy Minister of Finance and Secretary of Economic Policy in Brazil, has a long career in international organizations, previously at the World Bank, and now as an executive director at the Inter-American Development Bank. When we were preparing for this discussion, one of the things that stood out is that José Guilherme not only is well known in Washington, D.C. as an authority who knows the Bretton Woods institution from the inside, but someone who has got access to resources and people and networks that allow him to have a very privileged position, both as someone who understands the context, but also as an operator. José Guilherme, welcome back to Columbia University. It's a great pleasure to have you here.
I will take out this mask. Thank you very much, Sydney. Thank you all for joining. I have been, thanks to Sydney's generosity, I have been a frequent participant in this Brazilian seminar. But in the last 2 years, only virtually once, and actually in Europe. So it's great to be back in New York after 2 years or more. In general, Sydney asked me to bring a topic that I'm doing some kind of analytical work, or that I did some kind of analytical work. In my current position, this has been less frequent, but in any case, last year, thanks to a common friend of some of us here, Otaviano Canuto, and another friend, Renato Bauman, very good friends, invited me to contribute to an IPEA. IPEA is a very well-known think tank in Brazil, public, a publication of IPEA about the Brazil, the possibility of Brazil joining the OECD. And so I prepared this paper together with André Soares, in which we try to quantify impacts, in a very detailed and careful way. So we gave ourselves this challenge, this task of trying to measure impact. It's not easy, but in general, this how does it do this here?
To the right.
in general, this publication is a very interesting publication because it covers several areas. Unfortunately, most of the documents of the papers are in Portuguese. But I see that at least this half of the room here is fluent in Portuguese. But there is one paper in English, and I forgot to send it to you, which is precisely the paper by Otaviano Canuto, my good friend Otaviano Canuto. So if you guys are interested, I will send to Sydney afterwards the paper by Otaviano, which is a very nice paper for you to discuss. We circulated two papers, mine in a very quick English translation, and another one that sets up the let's say the framework or the conditions for OECD accession. So basically, OECD, as Sydney was mentioning, is a club of rich countries created many years ago, formed by 36 member countries. 20 of them joined at the date of creation or immediately after. The others joined later, and this is important, as we will see. And as Sydney was saying, is the main characteristics of this institution is to discuss, disseminate, and align best practices in terms of governance and public policies. It's not like the World Bank or the IMF that engages with a country with some kind of support and define some measures that need to be adopted in some specific areas, depending on the operation. It's actually, there's no negotiation here. It's simply an idea that the members of this club follow best practices in terms of public policies in a wide range of topics, right? From taxes to environment, to export promotion, to subsidies, etc., etc. So it's a very important club in this sense. Disseminates a lot of best practices. Everybody who deals with social sciences somehow gets in touch with OECD papers, documents, and publications. And as Sydney, as we actually say at the beginning of the paper, since 2017, Brazil made set the objective of joining the OECD, and has been pursuing this objective. It started very strongly in 2017, but actually you can go backwards and see that actually in the previous governments, it was already something very important, and Brazil was already getting closer to OECD, being much more as part of a framework created at the OECD to bring developing countries. Brazil was an active participant. So this is, I just mentioned what is written here, but basically OECD, no, I'm confusing here. I'm trying to change. No, one back. Oh, yeah. So the countries that joined more recently the OECD were countries from Central and Eastern Europe, and more recently Latin America, such as Mexico, Chile, Colombia, and more recently Costa Rica, right? So these are the two main pools where countries come to join the OECD. The group has a high degree of heterogeneity, but the entry of a country in the OECD is seen as a synonymous of success and reaching a higher level of standards for its public policy. And it is perceived as giving a seal of quality. I think you refer to this, the quality seal for the policies that are adopted. If you look at the numbers at the OECD, they speak for themselves, right? I mean, the countries are much more integrated. Countries are much more integrated. Average tariff imposed on goods and goods. Sorry, the charts, the original charts are in Portuguese. So capital goods, consumer goods, intermediate goods. These are the average tariff is 1/5 of the average tariff of the other countries, of the developing countries. The exports are much higher, especially of manufacturing goods, capital goods, intermediate goods, and consumer goods as well. The exception being, of course, matérias-primas, no? So, raw goods, which are, of course, not exactly the main topic here. So, and in addition, direct investments and direct investments are particularly important for this the integration of these economies. So what we try how we try to understand the potential impacts of joining and becoming a member of this club in terms of the economy. You can think of this as possibly, I joined this club and now I will export more or get more foreign direct investment. But what exactly is the mechanism? How this can happen? And perhaps one way to think about this is the literature of global value chains. Richard Baldwin, probably heard about him or even read some of his papers and books, has been at the forefront of the idea of global value chains reshaping the world. And the multilateral organizations in general follow suit and are all of them working hard on this topic. The World Development Report of the World Bank in 2020 was precisely on global value chains. It's a big report, and the World Bank, the OECD, WTO, and others prepare several joint publications on global value chains. I was the co-editor of one of these publications. But what global value chains mean? Global value chains is the idea that trade has changed since the end of the 20th century. And this has to do with what is called the second unbundling. Let me show this in this chart that are draw heavily on Richard Baldwin's book. The first unbundling is the fact that markets were separated from consumption was separated from production, right? This is 1800s. This unbundling took place and created markets, basically markets. But markets are basically local. Instead of having all the production and consumption in one household, now you go to the market. But the market is across the street. It's very near here. The second unbundling, which has happened since the end of the 20th century, is precisely the fact that the costs of communication and costs in the ICT revolution and reduction also of cost of services drives offshoring and unbundling of factories. Now I don't need to, in the first unbundling, I can separate production from consumption, but I have to produce everything here together. The second unbundling means that I can now produce things spread around the world. I can have a plant, a production process that I buy from one part from China, one part from Korea, one part from Brazil, and assemble all this in a third country and sell it in the US. So this is basically what globalization means for many people. And this is the idea of global value chain. Richard Baldwin makes a comment that I always like to make, that global value chains is probably a wrong way of describing these things. They are not global. Many of them are regional. You have factory Europe, you have factory Asia, you have factory North America, sorts of. And they are not exactly value chains. They are actually networks of production. But it's much more sexier to say global value chains than to say regional networks of production, right? So the idea, what is new here is precisely because I have a plant operating across countries, countries can join the production process with smaller tasks, with smaller components. They don't need to build the whole industry. So for smaller countries, it's a huge advantage. And second, the flows of knowledge can go back and forth. So from a development point of view, this can have a very important impact, no, in terms of bringing knowledge to the developing world that connects through global value chain. So this is basically the logic. I will skip this charts here. But one thing that I think is important related to global value chains is precisely the fact that in addition to the reduction of costs, you need assurance that you will work with other countries, with plants based in other countries, and that there will be no, or you will minimize risks of having some sort of interruption or some sort of takeover, So in addition to the reduction in costs, what also helped the spreading of global value chains is precisely the fact that free trade agreements that expanded dramatically in the 90s and early 2000s, the free trade agreements became much more deep. And what does deep mean? The free trade agreements go beyond exchange of market access between countries. It's not a country exchanging. So I will reduce my tariff here. You will reduce your tariff on that other good, and we will. And this is our agreement. No, the agreement is we will exchange this, and in addition, we will work on labor market policies. We will work on intellectual property policies, and et cetera, et cetera. So you go well beyond the trade, specific trade aspect of the deal, and you actually look at other aspects that form what you can call the business environment, or the climate for investments. From this point of view, and there is strong evidence that this increase in free trade agreements and deep free trade agreements is associated with the increase of trade, especially what is called trade of global value chains, or GVC trade, which is basically trade of intermediate products, right? So I'm trading within a firm, or I'm trading between firms, but basically doing this with different enterprises sometimes, but in a way that is very connected and contracted. No, these are contractual relationships, which means that these relations are established. I like to tell the story that I was at the World Bank, and I went to visit a country called North Macedonia. There was a problem with the name of the country because of dispute with Greece. It was sometimes called former Yugoslavian Republic of Macedonia, but now it's North Macedonia. This has been separate. And it's a 2 million inhabitants country, so a small country in the middle of Europe. And as we usually did, we did all the statistics. We looked at all the statistics before traveling there, and we had all the main goods that they exported. But the day we arrived, they said, no, this is no longer true. We just 2 plants of auto parts just started production here last week. So now our main export product is actually parts and components. So from literally day to night, the change in the product in the export products of the country was very important. So this is the type of thing that with the value chains do, and this is a typical regional value chain, a regional network of production. So the way we think about when going back to the OECD session, the way we think about this is precisely the OECD session is in a way the deep part, the non-trade part of this deep free trade agreement. So it's the the part that encourages countries to exchange investments and create a network of production that go beyond their frontiers, right? This is basically the way we rationalize this analysis. And then we did, well, nobody will read this, not even me, no? But basically the idea here is that how could we try to measure then the impact of joining the OECD? We thought, well, let's see, 10 countries joined later the OECD. Let's see what happens to them. But how can I see this? I can look at their exports. If I look at their exports and I see that their exports are growing, does this mean that the OECD had an impact on their export, a positive impact on their? Can I come to this conclusion that because they are growing, it was the OECD or the accession to the OECD? No, I need to compare to a situation in which they would not join the OECD. So what we did is basically to create a comparative group, a control group, a group of countries that didn't join the OECD and that had some similarities in terms of economic structure. So this is what we did. We created these countries through, we created this control group and through correlations. And we looked at the experience of the countries that joined the OECD, Mexico, Colombia, et cetera, compared to this group. Differences, and some other things. And we did several model specifications. What I wanted to show to you is basically the result. Don't look at the table, but in the text, what we found is a significant impact, positive impact. So these countries that joined OECD had a performance in terms of exports and foreign direct investment higher than the similar countries that didn't join the OECD in this period. The impacts are not very high, at the level of 1 to 2%, 2.5% in the case of FDI growth, which is not enormous, but it's significant and statistically significant. And since these are flows, this can be imagined as something that grows with time. And given that some of these countries joined the OECD in the 2000s, you can think of this as more short-term impacts. No? One can imagine that in the long term, this process will reinforce itself and will can make this impacts stronger. Despite all the econometric efforts that we did here, we still call it basically correlation. No, we are very careful about this because we know working at this level of aggregation, there are so many things happening at the same time. I mean, Mexico joined the OECD when Mexico was signing the NAFTA. So I mean, certainly NAFTA had a huge impact in terms of exports in Mexico compared to OECD. So these are things that you can try to control econometrically, but it's not that easy. In any case, we find this important impact that we prefer to call correlation, but it seems to confirm the size of the impact seems to confirm the idea that you have to do more in terms of the country. No, it's not only joining the OECD, but it's actually putting in place these policies that can help the countries in the long run. We make several suggestions for future research. If any one of you are interested in doing some more econometric or statistical work, please feel free to contact me. But I ended up with a couple of questions for discussion. This is more long-term questions. The first is what I just mentioned. No? Perhaps the long-term effects are more important given the permanent, the persistence of good policies. Perhaps persistence of good policies are more important than reforms. And there's a literature about this. No, I mean, and the paper by Canuto in the same magazine, this Impera journal, also touches on this topic. The two other questions are more related to global value chains. Now there is this idea, well, Brazil does not participate in global value chain. It's true, but it's not entirely true in the sense that Brazil does participate in global value chains. Think of Embraer. Embraer is a plant that trades with everybody in the world and brings goods, imports goods, and is extremely well connected to other. And there are others. I mean, high technology. I was discussing with Sydney last week about some other examples in Brazil, and one of the reasons why Brazil and South American countries are not well connected to global value chains is first is distance, geography. Geography matters. The main model in trade, the canonic model in trade theory is the gravity model, which is related to distance. Now we start with distance, and logistics, and the fact that these countries are basically produced, and coming back to the raw materials, they are upstream in the value chain. So they are not connected to value chains as they are not part of the middle of the process. They are not in the manufacturing. Well, Brazil has a very established and very important industrial sector, but it's much less connected than others. No, but perhaps we have some people here that can bring some light on this. But one question is this still important? I mean, is joining global value chains an objective, or are we done with this process? This was the expansion of trade between 1990s, early 90s to 2000, and before the global crisis of 2008-9 is impressive. Trade grew. The elasticity of trade to GDP was more than was almost 2. No, it's in some periods. So trade was growing because of this, the fact that the unbundling of the production process. But has this stalled? Has this already reached a level that will not grow? So this is an important question for future to think about policy. No. And the second is how can if it is important, how can South American countries overcome logistic challenges, and the fact that they rely a lot on primary products. And here there is and let me do a little bit of publicity of the IDB report that was produced on trade last year, perhaps 18 months ago, which has a very nice chapter about how agriculture is becoming a new manufacturing in a way, in a sense of using much more commodities in a way, not commodities as raw materials, but established goods that are prepared in a way that and used in a way that connects agriculture with the rest of the sectors through services. So the main message here is perhaps that the way things are going, what we will see is more and more technology applied to agriculture, and we are seeing this in countries like Brazil, big time, in South America in general. And this requires much more integration and bringing goods from abroad to make sure that the value added is created. So I don't know. This is basically the messages that I had for this talk today, and I hope I was still on that.
Excellent.
Thanks
so much.
Sorry about that.
Awesome. So I think this was a great way to kick off the conversation. And my first question, Guilherme, is that we're living in times of polarization in Brazil, and there are very few topics that we would consider as consensus in society right now. OECD's application started we could say that it started during the Temer administration, but an important step was made during the Dilma administration, and now the Bolsonaro administration has been pushing very strongly for the accession. So why do you think that there's so much of I think of agreement in different from all these different political perspectives behind the importance of Brazil's participation in the OECD?
I think this is closer to a policy that interests to the state rather than only the current administration. So from this point of view, I think that, doing public policies is good, implementing sound public policies. I think, based on my experience in public administration, I think that this is shared by different groups and different political groups. So this is one thing. The second is perhaps the intensity of putting this in place was different. I mean, so starting with the Temer government, it was much more. This was perceived as much more priority. It was given a higher priority. But having said that, I agree with you. This is more of this is something that is shared by different actors in the political spectrum.
And one of the reasons that we mentioned at the beginning, pushing for the accession to the OECD is important because it helps align priorities inside the country. Do you perceive that as someone who is on this privileged position as an observer of the idea of modernizing the Brazilian state, and you see different elements of the Brazilian government aligning around this particular goal?
I think I see this as an objective for many governments, many countries, and quite frankly, and it's not by coincidence that I made a parallel between the OECD and the multilateral system, because the multilateral system also pushes for these types of policies in perhaps a more fragmented way, in the sense of more project by project kind of scheme. But in a way, they work together. And from this point of view, I see a lot of demand for these policies. I think that one interesting aspect, for instance, in Brazil, is that an institution like the IDB or even the World Bank, at the operational level, and you were with us at the World Bank at some point, at the operational level, the loans of the World Bank and the IDB are much more directed to subnational governments in Brazil than to the federal government. It's much more an issue of bringing the knowledge to levels of government that are less exposed to the international arena, and so perhaps have more difficulty to assess best practices. So this is something, and this is something that the federal government in different, and I worked either in the side of the multilateral side or in the public administration, in several administrations, and all of them were actually recommending that this policy should be pursued.
Very good. You mentioned the difference between correlation and causation, right? To what extent acceding to OECD might promote significant changes. But can you think of some anecdotal evidence where participating as a member in OECD has led to significant improved policies?
I don't know. Perhaps this should be. I'm sure that in the journal that I mentioned, there are good examples. For instance, there is a paper on Colombia, how Colombia benefited from the OECD. I recommend it. I think it is in Portuguese, but the author is Colombian, so probably it's originally Spanish or English. But there are some interesting experiences, particularly in the region, in Latin America, that I think could be very helpful.
And what Brazil still need to do, what does Brazil still need to do in order to facilitate this process. We understand that there are multiple stakeholders, and it's not only the country's efforts that is necessary for this to happen, but within Brazil's reach.
The process takes time. Definitely, the early expectation that this could be done in 1 year was excessively optimistic. This was many years ago, in 2017. But the process is going. Actually, a month ago or so, it was just announced that Brazil, Argentina, and Peru from the region were moving ahead with several applications. So with several steps that are required. So I think things are being done right now. Brazil is and to come back to your previous question, actually, this was done before. If you look at what Brazil did in terms of a country that is not part of the OECD, but that joined the committees and the discussions about the committees, Brazil was perhaps the country more active. Certainly compared to other big countries, it was the country with a more activist role in terms of participation.
Interesting. Why did you think that happened?
I mean, because the approximation to the OECD was perceived as something good by public officials, by the public administration in general.
Mm-hmm. So if you're on the other side of the table as an OECD officer, what would you tell Brazilian authorities?
Oh, it depends on it depends a lot on the area that you're exploring, but in general, is to keep up with the work, with the good work, regardless of who's in power, political party, and do what needs to be done.
And when you think about the future of OECD, right? So to what extent it seemed that bringing Brazil on board is a priority for the organization? Why do you think that's the case, and how do you see OECD as an institution advancing its own agenda?
I think that there's one of the papers that we circulated from Mello describes well the process and how this was actually a debate within the OECD. If they wanted the process of enlargement to grow bigger, or if they wanted to restrict it. And there are different positions. And as a consequence of this, I guess, this political economy, what you see is that the expansion is geographically limited to Europe because of the strong efforts of European countries to bring on board the other European countries that are joining the European Union, and in Latin America because of the strong leadership role that U.S. and Canada. So this basically is what you see.
And that's a very good point, right? The fact that OECD's headquarters is in Paris compared to Bretton Woods institutions that are in DC, do you think that there's less resistance or less association to the Americans in terms of their influence when you think about how the organization pushed for its own agenda?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to read about the story of the history of the institution, because the concept of a transatlantic partnership was embedded since the beginning, in the way that the institution was formed. And the idea of bringing the U.S. and the developed countries of the Western Hemisphere was very, very important since the beginning. And I think that the fact is that you can say that the OECD is the most European of all these institutions, or the most American of the European institutions. So, but it's an interesting melange.
And I have to share a short story here with the students. Right after I finished school here, and before Jose Guilherme invited me to join the bank, so he was my first boss at the bank. So he made some mistakes. That's one of
Not really.
But I remember that I also applied for OECD, and I got an invitation for an interview. But the first question they asked me, do you have another passport or another nationality? That's only Brazilian. And that might open opportunities for the students here. And I think this is the kind of audience that this would be of interest, not only from the policy standpoint, but also as prospective employers for people like you who are developing the skills and can contribute to the organization itself. And so, I think the last question before we finalize this first part of our conversation here, and we move to the Q&A on the private setting here with the students. When you think about the OECD in the context of the other international organizations, nowadays, when you think about how WTO has been less than effective, when you think about the crisis that some of our organizations, some of them, you know pretty well from the inside, led to actually the emergence of some other developing organizations around the world. Do you think that OECD is well positioned to maybe play a different role, or is it an organization that is adapted to the needs that we currently see? To what extent do you think that OECD is well equipped to play a different influence?
It's very different from the WTO in the sense that it's not thematic or limited. It's really deals with governance in general terms of public sector governance with several dimensions. So it's more comparable to the large Bretton Woods organization, like the World Bank, in the sense that it mimics a sort of government, no? I mean, shadow government, no? So you can go to different ministries if you like. So yeah, from this point of view, it's well equipped to deal with the challenges that developing countries have.
Well, thanks so much, Demi. So we're terminating the first part of our class here, and for those of you who are following us on YouTube, we'll be back in a couple of weeks. And in the meantime, thanks so much for joining us. So Anna, you ready to